The first time I met Theresa Pendle, she was standing on my lawn with a clipboard and an attitude like she ran the country. "You can't have that mailbox," she snapped, pointing at the black steel box I'd installed the weekend before. "It's not HOA approved," I blinked. "I'm sorry, who are you?" she puffed up like a blowfish. "Theresa Pendle, president of the Oak Ridge Meadows HOA. You're in violation of Article 7, Section 12 approved mailbox styles." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not in your HOA," her lips twitched. "Yes, you are." "No," I said. "I bought this house in August. I checked. My property was never annexed into the HOA. I even had my lawyer confirm it before closing." She stared at me like I had just kicked her cat. "You live inside the boundary. That makes you subject to the rules." "No, it doesn't," I said calmly. "That's not how HOAs work." She stormed off, muttering something about non-compliance and legal action. I didn't take her seriously until I got served. A week later, a process server showed up at my door with a civil complaint. Theresa had filed a lawsuit against me in small claims court for delinquent dues and breach of community covenant. She was demanding over $4,000 in fees, penalties, and legal costs. I was floored. I called my lawyer, a guy named Joel who'd helped with my closing paperwork. Once he stopped laughing, he said, "She's got nothing, but if she wants to go to court, then let's go." The court date was set for 4 weeks later. I spent those weeks collecting every document I could find: property records, HOA maps, title histories, and municipal zoning documents. I even went down to the county office and got the original development plat. Not once in the last 20 years had my parcel ever been legally annexed into Oak Ridge Meadows HOA. But Theresa wasn't done. 2 weeks before the hearing, I came home to find a bright orange violation notice duct taped to my garage door. My offense. Parking my work truck in my own driveway. Then came the newsletter. Theresa had printed a full-page community alert with my name in bold letters, accusing me of being a dangerous disruptor and serial violator. She slipped copies into every mailbox on the block. That did it. I installed 2 security cameras, mounted one on the garage and one facing the yard. Within 3 days, I caught Theresa and her vice president sneaking onto my property and snapping pictures of my backyard. I filed a police report for trespassing. The next time she came to my door, I didn't even open it. I just said through the intercom, "See you in court, Theresa." She shouted something about bringing down the hammer of justice. I couldn't wait. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with a binder so thick it needed its own seat. Joel met me outside the courtroom, flipping through the final exhibit list with a grin that made the bailiff raise an eyebrow. "Let's see how far she wants to take this," he muttered, adjusting his tie. Inside, Theresa was already seated at the petitioner's table, flanked by a man I recognized as her so-called legal advisor, an out-of-town paralegal named Craig who wasn't licensed to practice law in our state. He looked like he'd printed his credentials from a website that also sold herbal supplements. She didn't look at me when I sat down, but her mouth tightened when Joel placed the binder between us with a satisfying thud. When the judge entered, he wasted no time. "Miss Pendle, you are suing Mr. Walker for unpaid dues and violations of Homeowners Association covenants. Is that correct?" Theresa stood stiffly. "Yes, Your Honor." "He has refused to pay HOA dues for 5 months and has willfully violated multiple community standards." The judge flipped through her filing. "I see. And you're asserting that his property is within your association's jurisdiction?" "Correct. We have maps." "The neighborhood design clearly includes his lot." Joel stood. "Your Honor, may I submit evidence to the contrary?" The judge nodded, and Joel handed over the first set of documents: county zoning records, the development plat, and the original HOA charter. The judge's brow furrowed almost immediately. He didn't say anything for a full minute. Then he looked at Theresa. "Miss Pendle, your association's charter was filed in the year 2004. Mr. Walker's property was developed and sold in 2006. There is no annexation paperwork, no amendment to the charter, no recorded vote, nothing. Theresa's face flushed a deep, splotchy red. That's because the original developer intended to include all future phases. It was always the plan. The judge leaned forward. Intent is not legally binding. Only recorded and approved amendments are. Without that, Mr. Walker is not and has never been under your HOA's authority. Craig cleared his throat. With respect, Your Honor, we believe Mr. Walker's continued refusal to comply has created a hostile atmosphere in the community. The judge raised a hand. Are you licensed to practice law in this state? Craig hesitated. Well, I know. Then sit down. That was the first time I saw Theresa's expression falter. There was a flicker of panic behind her eyes, like she realized she'd brought a wooden sword to a gunfight. Joel stood again. Your Honor, in addition to the absence of legal jurisdiction, we're submitting security footage showing members of the HOA Executive Committee trespassing on Mr. Walker's property without notice or cause. He handed over a flash drive. The judge plugged it into the courtroom monitor. There, in grainy black and white, was Theresa and her vice president ducking under the side gate and snapping photos of my backyard. The judge watched the whole clip. Then he turned back to her. Miss Pendle, did you have a warrant or permission to enter Mr. Walker's property? Theresa's voice was tight. We were conducting an inspection. You had no legal authority to inspect a property outside your jurisdiction. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Joel continued, flipping to another section in the binder. Furthermore, we have copies of defamatory statements distributed via the HOA newsletter, including libelous claims and a call for residents to, quote, watch Mr. Walker closely as he may pose a threat to community harmony. The judge took the newsletter pages, his expression unreadable. Did you write these, Miss Pendle? She straightened. As president, I am responsible for all official communications, yes, he nodded slowly. I'm issuing a formal reprimand for harassment and unlawful trespass. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the county attorney for review of potential civil rights violations. Theresa's mouth opened again, but no sound came out. Craig looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Joel wasn't done. Your Honor, we've also uncovered financial irregularities in the HOA's budget filings. We believe the board diverted funds intended for community maintenance to cover legal expenses related to this and other personal vendettas. That got the judge's attention. Explain. Joel tapped another document. Over the past 12 months, the HOA spent over $32,000 on legal fees, yet no lawsuits were filed beyond this one. We've collected testimony from former board members who resigned after questioning these expenses. One of them is present today. A woman in the gallery stood mid-40s, short gray hair, tight-lipped. I recognized her from a few block parties. Her name was Diane. The judge allowed her to speak. She explained how Theresa had pushed through budget reallocations with no community vote, bullied dissenting board members into silence, and used HOA funds to hire Craig as a consultant at a suspicious hourly rate. By the time she finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the clerk had stopped typing. The judge leaned back in his chair. Miss Pendle, it appears that the homeowners association you oversee has been operating outside its legal scope, engaging in harassment and misusing community funds. I am ordering an immediate audit and placing a temporary injunction on all HOA enforcement actions. Theresa stood up, trembling. You can't do that. This is my neighborhood. I built this community from the ground up. No, ma'am, the judge replied. You built a private club and pretended it was a government. That ends today. He turned to the clerk. Make a note. I am scheduling a hearing to determine whether the Oak Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association should be formally dissolved under state statute due to gross mismanagement and violation of its charter. The courtroom erupted. People in the gallery, most of them residents, whispered and stared at Theresa like she'd just been unmasked as a con artist. Because she had, outside the courthouse, Deanne approached me. "She's been getting away with this for years," she said. "We just didn't know what to do about it." "Well," I said, "now the judge does." Over the next few days, the neighborhood was buzzing. Stories came out Theresa fining an elderly woman for having wind chimes, forcing a single dad to remove a playset because it clashed with the aesthetic, even threatening to tow cars from driveways during family gatherings. None of it legal. None of it documented. Just bullying wrapped in bureaucracy. With the injunction in place, residents stopped answering her emails. Volunteers removed the HOA signs from the community entrances. The newsletter went dark, and then, 3 weeks later, the state auditor's office arrived. They brought boxes. Theresa's house was raided at dawn. Officers carried out hard drives, file boxes, and an entire plastic tub labeled HOA private. Her vice president resigned the same day. Craig, he vanished. His website went offline and no one's seen him since. At the dissolution hearing, the judge didn't even hesitate. Based on the audit findings, including the misappropriation of funds, false claims of jurisdiction, and unlawful enforcement activities, the Oak Ridge Meadows HOA is hereby dissolved effective immediately. Theresa tried to object. Her voice was hoarse and her hands shook. The judge didn't even look at her. Walking out of that courtroom, residents clapped me on the back, some laughing, others just relieved. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I actually belonged there. I didn't do it alone. All I did was refuse to roll over. Turns out, that's all it ever really takes to beat a paper tyrant. It was strange how quiet the neighborhood got after the judge issued the dissolution. No more flyers on doors. No unsolicited notices wedged into mailboxes. No more clipboard patrols. What replaced it was something that felt unfamiliar in Oak Ridge Meadows. People talking to each other. Not passing glances or forced smiles, real conversations. I was out trimming the hedges one morning when a man I hadn't met before stepped onto the curb in front of my house. He had a faded Army Ranger cap, a limp in his right leg, and a toolbox hanging from his left hand. "You're Walker?" he asked. I stood up. "Yeah, you, name's Calvin, used to be on the HOA maintenance crew until Theresa fired me for insubordination." He set the toolbox down. "I've got something you might want to see." He pulled out a phone and tapped through a few files. Then he handed it over. It was a scanned invoice dated 6 months earlier showing a payment of nearly $12,000 to a landscaping company. The odd part, the work was never done. The address listed was for the community greenbelt, a stretch of lawn that hadn't seen fresh mulch or trimming in over a year. "That's not the only one," Calvin said. "I've got 7 more, same company, different dates. No crew ever showed up. No equipment." The invoice numbers jump around like they were made up on the spot. "Who owns the company?" I asked. "You're not gonna like the answer." I followed Calvin back to his truck, where he showed me a business license printout. The landscaping company was registered under a shell corporation. The listed mailing address, a P.O. box rented under Theresa's maiden name. I took a breath. That's fraud. And money laundering. If she used HOA dues to pay a fake company she controlled, that's felony territory. Calvin nodded. "I tried reporting it last year." Got a visit from Craig the next day. He told me if I didn't back off, I'd be dealing with enforcement. 2 days later, my truck got towed from my own driveway. I sent the files to Joel. Within the hour, he called back. "We're taking this to the state attorney general's office," he said. "I've already contacted them. They're opening an investigation." By that afternoon, 2 unmarked government vehicles were parked outside Theresa's house. She didn't answer the door, but the agents didn't leave. They waited. And eventually, her garage door opened, and she stepped out wearing the same blazer she'd worn to court, like she was still trying to project authority. They served her with a subpoena and a search warrant. No one said anything as the agents entered her house, but word spread fast. By dusk, half the neighborhood was standing outside watching the boxes come out. Someone brought lawn chairs. I stayed a few houses back, not wanting to draw attention. But Deanne found me anyway. She kept paper records, she said. Didn't trust cloud storage. Thought it made her vulnerable. That'll do it, I said. The warrant revealed more than anyone expected. Not just fake invoices, but falsified board meeting minutes, unauthorized dues increases that were never voted on, and payments to a consulting group that didn't exist outside a single checking account opened in Craig's name. The bombshell came 2 days later. Joel called again, this time with a tone I hadn't heard before, sharper, more serious. They found bank transfers, he said. Theresa embezzled over $78,000 across 3 years. Some of it came from reserve funds meant for emergency repairs. The rest from inflated fines she issued to homeowners who never owed anything. Can they prove it? They already did. Her bank statements match the withdrawals. She's facing charges for wire fraud, mail fraud, and aggravated theft. The AG's office is recommending prosecution. The arrest came quietly. Early morning. Unmarked car. No lights, no sirens, but someone got a photo of her being walked out in cuffs, and within minutes it was on the neighborhood group chat. The silence after that wasn't the same kind as before. It was relief. I thought that would be the end of it, but the fallout was just beginning. With the HOA dissolved, the county had to step in to manage public areas while the neighborhood figured out how to self-govern. A few residents wanted to start a new association, this time voluntary, but most were done with the idea entirely. Then came the restitution hearings. Joel and I sat in the third row of the county courthouse, just behind a dozen homeowners who had been wrongfully fined or had property damaged by HOA contractors under Theresa's orders. Some had paid thousands to avoid liens. Others had lived under the threat of foreclosure. Now they wanted their money back. The judge ordered asset seizures. Theresa's rental property, her luxury SUV, and the P.O. box account linked to the landscaping scam were all frozen. Craig, who had resurfaced in Arizona under a different last name, was picked up by federal agents and brought back for questioning. He flipped almost immediately. With Craig's cooperation, prosecutors were able to trace nearly every fraudulent action back to Theresa. He gave up emails, phone logs, even recordings of meetings where she discussed creative enforcement tactics and how to incentivize compliance through discomfort. She pled not guilty. The trial was set for the following spring. In the meantime, the neighborhood transformed. People held actual meetings at the local rec center, not about rules or aesthetics, but about organizing community events, forming cleanup crews, and helping elderly residents with yard work. For the first time, Oak Ridge Meadows felt like a place people chose to live in, not one they were forced to endure. One afternoon, I found a note taped to my door. Handwritten, no envelope, it said, "Thanks for standing up. You made it okay for the rest of us to speak." No name. Just a small pressed flower tucked into the fold. I kept it in the inside pocket of my jacket. In the weeks leading up to the trial, Joel asked if I'd be willing to testify. Not just about the lawsuit, but about the conduct I'd witnessed firsthand, especially the efforts Theresa made to intimidate residents into silence. I said yes. In court, I described everything. The fake violation notices, the newsletter smear, the trespassing, the elaborate lie she built around a non-existent jurisdiction. When I finished, the prosecutor asked one last question. "Why didn't you just pay the fines and move on?" I looked at Theresa, her face blank, her hands clenched in front of her. "Because if I had," I said, "she would have done it to someone else and someone after that. She didn't want order, she wanted control. And she didn't care who she had to grind down to get it." The jury took less than a day, guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 6 years with no possibility of parole before serving 3. Craig received a lighter sentence, 18 months, plus 5 years probation for cooperating. Both were barred from serving on any homeowners association board or managing community funds for life. The county liquidated what remained of the HOA accounts, returning a portion to affected residents. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Calvin got his job back, this time working directly for the county as a ground supervisor. Deanne was elected chair of the new community council, a volunteer group with no enforcement powers, just a budget for events and a hotline for elderly services. And me, I went back to living. No inspection notices, no surprise fines, no one photographing my backyard. Just peace and the occasional knock from someone asking to borrow a ladder or share leftover barbecue. It was never about a mailbox. It was about someone trying to weaponize authority in a place that was supposed to be home. But she picked the wrong neighborhood and the wrong person. I hadn't expected to be called back into court again, but 3 weeks after Theresa was sentenced, I received a formal subpoena. This time, it wasn't about testifying, it was about attending a victim's restitution review. The prosecutor wanted all parties present who'd been financially or legally targeted by the HOA's false authority. Apparently, the investigation had uncovered a final layer to Theresa's scheme, one that hadn't been fully unraveled until now. I walked into the courtroom and immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. There were more people this time, over 24 neighbors I hadn't seen before. A few faces were red-rimmed, others stone-faced. Deanne sat near the front, flipping through a stack of papers with highlighted sections peeking out. She nodded at me but didn't speak. The judge, a different one this time, stern, gray-haired, and efficient, called the session to order. We are here to address additional findings from the Oak Ridge Meadows Homeowners Association audit. The scope of this hearing includes the misappropriation of funds, unauthorized legal actions, and property liens filed without cause. He paused, then looked directly at the prosecutor. "You may proceed." The prosecutor stood and began by laying out a new timeline, one that hadn't been part of Theresa's original trial. It turned out she hadn't just operated a fake landscaping company and falsified fines. She had also created a fictitious compliance council, supposedly made up of neutral third-party reviewers who approved enforcement measures. The only problem? That council never existed. The names listed were either deceased former residents or entirely fabricated. Using this fake council, she had filed 17 property liens over a 4-year span. The victims, mostly elderly homeowners and those who lived alone. One of them, a widower named Eugene, had lost his house after being told he owed over $12,000 in back dues and violations. He'd moved into an assisted living facility shortly after being evicted. "I never questioned it," Eugene said from the stand, voice trembling. "I thought I'd missed something. She had the letterhead, the documents. I trusted it." The judge's jaw tightened. The prosecutor continued, revealing that the fictitious counsel had also signed off on 2 forced foreclosures, both of which were sold to buyers linked to Theresa's cousin in a neighboring town. She'd leveraged her position to seize homes, flip them through relatives, and pocket the profits under the guise of reinvestment into community infrastructure. Theresa wasn't present this time. Her attorney, a public defender now, sat silently at the defense table. When asked to respond, he simply said, "We reserve our statements for the upcoming civil proceedings." The judge didn't wait. He ruled that all improper liens be revoked immediately and that ownership of the illegally acquired homes be returned to the original title holders or their estates. He ordered the court trustee to begin asset liquidation of any property tied to Theresa's shell companies, including the cousins' holdings, pending verification of fraudulent transfers. That evening, I joined several neighbors at Calvin's garage, which had become an unofficial meeting space since the HOA office was shuttered. Folding chairs circled a workbench, and someone brought an old coffee maker that wheezed like a dying animal but still did the job. Deanne stood in front of a whiteboard she'd wheeled in from a local school auction. Written in marker were 5 names, former board members who had resigned quietly before things spiraled. She tapped the board and turned to us. "I spoke to every one of them," she said. They'd each tried to push back against Theresa at some point. One was threatened with legal action, another had her tires slashed. All 5 were removed through emergency votes that never happened. That explained the sudden turnover we'd all noticed but never questioned. Deanne passed around photocopies of exit statements resignations that had been rewritten and retyped by Theresa, with forged signatures to make them look voluntary. She rewrote their resignations, I asked, and filed them with the county clerk, Deanne said. I checked the forms myself. Every one of them was notarized by Craig. Calvin leaned forward. That means the county records have been tampered with. Exactly, she said, which makes it a felony. The next morning, Deanne and I took the documents to the county recorder's office. We met with an investigator from the district attorney's office who had already been assigned to the case. When he saw the forged resignations, he asked us to sit tight while he made a few calls. Within an hour, 2 detectives arrived to take formal statements. They confirmed that altering public records with fraudulent notary stamps could lead to additional charges, this time involving conspiracy and document fraud. This just keeps growing, Deanne muttered as we walked out, but it didn't stop there. Later that week, the State Department of Justice announced it was launching a broader probe into HOA governance abuses across the county. Oak Ridge Meadows had become the poster child for what could happen when an HOA was left unchecked and shielded by apathy. The story made the local news again. Then regional networks picked it up. A few days later, a state senator called for new legislation requiring independent oversight for all HOAs with annual budgets exceeding $50,000. The proposed bill, tentatively named the Pendle Reform Act, aimed to eliminate self-appointment powers and enforce mandatory transparency on all financial decisions. Theresa's name was now legally synonymous with corruption. One afternoon, I visited Eugene at his new apartment. It wasn't flashy, just a clean, well-lit unit in a senior complex, but it felt peaceful. He was sitting by the window, a chessboard open and half-played. "I heard they're giving you your home back," I said. He nodded slowly. "Not sure I'll move back in. Too many ghosts there. But it's good to know I didn't imagine it, that I wasn't just old and confused." "You weren't," I said. "You were targeted." He looked up. "You ever think about why she picked certain people? Because she thought no one would fight back." He tapped a knight across the board. She was wrong. The final piece of fallout came a month later, when the state issued a formal ban against Craig from serving in any legal or administrative capacity in the state of California. He was also ordered to pay restitution from his remaining assets, which turned out to include a condo in Scottsdale and a classic car collection he'd kept under a business name. The money collected was added to a victims' fund overseen by the county. It wasn't enough to make everyone whole, but it covered legal fees, refunded unjust fines, and helped offset the damages for those who had lost the most. As for the neighborhood well, Oak Ridge Meadows dropped the name. The community voted to revert to its original designation, West Briar Estates. New signage went up at the entrances, simple, unadorned, and paid for by a volunteer fund. No more board meetings, no more newsletters, just neighbors. A few months after the last hearing, the county sent me a letter. It thanked me for my role in exposing the fraud and included a formal commendation. I tucked it into a drawer and didn't think much of it, but that weekend, someone knocked on my door. It was a teenager, maybe 16, holding a clipboard and looking nervous. "Hi," he said. "I'm helping organize a community cleanup day. We're planting trees and repainting the park benches. Would you want to help?" I glanced at the flyer. No logos, no titles. Just a date, a time, and a list of things they hoped to accomplish. I smiled and nodded. "Count me in." There was no HOA anymore, no president, no enforcement letters or fake councils, just people, and that was more than enough.